All right, I'm excited this morning to introduce our two, I guess not guest speakers, our two speakers. We're continuing on our series called Seaview Stories. We had, I think, was it 3 weeks ago, maybe longer, we had the Rices talk about what God is doing in and through their lives. And I really love this time. I love hearing testimonies and hearing what God's doing in people's lives, because isn't it awesome to have a God who is active and at work in all of our lives? So this morning I'm going to intro them both, and then I'll have them come up one after the other. But first we have Zane this morning. Where are you, Zane? You can come up, mate. That's fine. So Zane he's part of the OG Seaview crew. And if you're not up with my lingo, that is the old Seaview crew. He has been here about 10 years. 10 at the least. His wife and 2 kids. They are a awesome couple. Amy and I love them in particular because they were very, very welcoming to us and made us really feel at home here, and moved to Adelaide. So such an awesome couple. Haven't had a chance to chat with Zane and Elise, please do so. Bombard them today, that'd be great. And after that, we have Kerry. So Kerry have been here 2 years. You came from Portlife in Port Adelaide and is part of our leadership team here, but also is actively involved in the kids ministry. I know our kids in particular love it when you are on. They are always engaged and actively enjoying everything that Kerry's doing. So these 2 great people to have in our church. So I'll hand over to Zane.
She'll be all right. Hey, morning everybody. So my bit of testimony story from today comes from a while back when I was 18. Which is, a while back more than I'd like to think. But a couple of interesting things about me when I was 18. Firstly, I was like most 18-year-old boys, quite a bit of an idiot. And secondly, my dad had left our family about 5 years prior to this, which had really broken us, and our whole family kind of fragmented at that stage, and I was holding on to a lot of anger about that. And I hadn't been into church in about 3 to 4 years at this stage. And here's another point, because otherwise the story becomes very less believable. I used to actually be quite fit and an athlete, unlike now, but I was actually quite fit back in the day, which will make more sense later. Anyway, I was at this stage, I was away with a girlfriend's family on their Easter camping trip, which was lovely, except being around a family who's well put together and loving and caring and all that's rather difficult when your family's absolutely anything but it. So I was really struggling being around all these people and needed to clear my head. So I chatted to the girlfriend and said, look, I'm going to go for a walk just to clear my head. And the national park which we were in, which was way out bush, zero reception, on the border of a couple of states. Basically, the girlfriend's mother told me it's basically a circle. So the national park's basically a circle surrounded by a river. So if you hit the river, you've hit the edge of the national park. And I went, all right, cool. I'm going to go for a walk that way because we're on the water here. If I go that way, I'll hit the water over there. I can sit down, have some time to clear my head. It'll be great. So I took off, left myself heaps of trail markers, about a 2-hour walk, got to the water, sat down, got to watch these beautiful swans play and some ducks. Lovely. It was great, cleared my head, and I was like, all right, time to start heading back. So I started heading back, and that's where it gets interesting because that's when I started to lose my trail markers. So I got about 45 minutes into walking from the water when I realised I am completely lost at this stage. So it's about 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon at this stage, and I have no idea where I am. It's just scrub as far as I can see. And I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Freaking out a little bit, but once again, 18-year-old boy, bit of an idiot. I've got this. I'll figure it out. So I knew the campsite was over here on the water, and I knew that basically it's a circle surrounded by water. So if I go somewhere over here, hit the water, and then go left, eventually I'm going to get to the campsite. So I'm like, right, I've got it. Took off running and ran for about 2 hours in that direction until I hit water. Okay, and when you hit the water, you're like, okay, cool, just need to follow this. I can have a drink. I've got my hat here. I'm going to scoop some water and drink it. I'm going to be okay. And I'm sitting there thinking, I told them we'll be back by sundown. And of course, being an 18-year-old idiot, my main focus at this point is I don't want to embarrass myself with the girlfriend's family, not thinking that I'm lost in a national park and this could end up really badly. So I'm really worried about that. So I'm running along the water. And I ran for about another 2 hours at that stage. And I know, unbelievable, but I could do that back then. But I ran for another 2 hours along the water, stopping every now and then, getting a drink with my hat. And that's when the sun went down. at the end of those 2 hours. And that was the point where I lost it because I realised, oh no, I'm going to be in big trouble with the girlfriend's family. But more importantly, the thought dawned on me, hey, I might not make it out of this. Which, as an 18-year-old, that's the first time you really think that, because it's all going to be okay until you suddenly realise, I'm stuck in the middle of a national park, I have no idea where I am, I thought I would have found the campsite by now, and you're starting to freak out. So, seeing as the sun went down, it was dark, and I went, right, I need to start walking, because if I keep running, I'm going to hurt myself and be in real bad shape. So I started walking, and I am losing it at this point, entirely freaked out. But I keep every 15, half an hour, 45 minutes, keep seeing these little animal trails going off into the middle of the park. Along this about another 2 hours of walking at this stage, and I'm seeing these trails, and every time I see one, I'm just getting this little nudge from God, take the trail. And I'm sitting there going, you've got to be kidding me. Heck no, I'm not taking that. I have water, I can last for days. If I stay with the water or follow the path, I'll get back to camp. I've been told it's basically a circle, follow the river, you'll be right. And then come across another animal trail, take the trail. Come on, Zane, take the trail. And I'm sitting there arguing with God about it, but after about 2 hours, I've kind of gone, all right, I'm so freaked out of my mind at this stage, I'm just going to trust God and I'm going to go for it. So I followed this animal trail. Now, not a walking path, an animal trail, so I'm talking like, thin little line of worn down grass, bit of dirt, and I'm following that. And it's quite easy to follow a big river by moonlight, not so much a small animal trail. So as I'm following this animal trail, hoping this is all going to work out, freaking out, I lose it occasionally, which is even scarier. So I'm kind of like taking a few steps forward. Is there more trail? Oh, I don't know. Is it just over here? I think that's... and managing to find it again occasionally. But obviously at this stage, I have just lost the plot and freaked out in my brain. But it was while I was walking along here that God started just talking to me about my life and what I was doing with it. Kept prodding me with thoughts, kept throwing ideas into my head, which I'm going, where's this coming from? But it was a lot about my life and what I was doing, and I just started having it out with God. Talking to him about my father and how angry I was at what he'd done, how angry I was at how he'd treated him and what our family's doing. Talking to him about church and how annoyed I was at churches I'd been in and how much they'd let me down, and just angry. And I was just having it out with God. And I mean, I hadn't spoken to my father in about 5 years, more than a yes, Dad, no, Dad, because I wanted nothing to do with him. But God stopped me with one single thought he threw into my head. If you die here tonight, your dad won't have any idea how you feel, because I'd never spoken to him about it. And that stopped me. I'm freaked out about everything going on, but that made me go, yeah, that's a legit option, that I could die here tonight, and all this anger I've been holding on to for 5 years, nobody would actually know what it was. So I promised God in that moment, right, God, if you get me out of this, I will talk to my dad as soon as I get back, and I'll tell him everything. And if you also do that, I'll start going back to church. And sure enough, within about the next half hour of following this animal trail, losing it occasionally and finding it again, I came across the car path, which went through the middle of the national park, which was pure relief, because that trail, the car trail, goes straight back out to the start of the national park. So at that moment, I've gone, okay, if I follow this trail, I'll get back to the entry to the national park, and I can sit there and I can wait, and a car will come past at some point and I can get some help. So massive relief. I was like, okay, I'm going to get through this. And after about another hour of walking along there, I ran into one of the search parties which was out looking for me, which was really nice. Now, this is a good point to bring up. If you're away on a family holiday with your girlfriend, don't get lost in a national park for 12 hours and have SES from 2 states out looking for you. It doesn't bode well for your relationship, okay? Hot tip. So, eventually got in the car, got back, rested, all good. After a couple more days, headed home. The day I got home, got on the phone to Dad, called him, organised to catch up, had a dinner with him, and then spent an hour yelling at him, which he graciously listened to and took. And we have a relationship now, which we didn't have then. And my kids have another grandfather, which they wouldn't have if I hadn't actually done that, because I needed to let go of that anger I was holding on to so God could do some work in me. And on top of that, that Sunday, I went to church for the first time in 3 to 4 years, and then stayed at that church for the next 7 years. So it was a massive changing moment for me. But the kicker to the story, and the reason I'm always going to say, if you get one of those nudges from God and you're sure it's from God, take it, is this. My girlfriend's mother, her exact words were, "It's basically a circle bordered by a river." And I took that, but the problem is, it's more like a lollipop. It's basically like a circle. So between the camp and where I ran to, the river changes direction and shoots out in about 2 to 3 days' walk. So if I had actually followed my plans instead of taking on what God was telling me to do, I probably wouldn't be here telling you that story, and it would have ended a much sadder story. So I'm very grateful that I managed to actually listen to God and take his words in his path instead of what I had. And that's the end of my little story. So I'm going to hand over to Kerry now.
Thank you. I might need the beast. Yeah, thank you. Hey, everybody. All right, it's going to be hard to follow Zane, but thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, so I've never done this before, guys. So be kind. Smile lots. Lexi, I'm looking at you, babe. It's pretty confronting when someone asks you to share your story, because I've then spent a few weeks trying to think up a really cracker story, and you write notes and you think you know what you're going to write about or say, and it just wasn't coming together, and so I've written some things down which I can still share. But then I was talking to my friend yesterday. I've got a friend who's in palliative care at the moment. And I was saying to her, I said, I got nothing, And she goes, that's okay. She goes, God knows. And I'm like, well, God needs to know a little faster because it's like 10 a.m. Tomorrow. She goes, that's all right. You'll get woken up during the night and he'll tell you. Now, she knows I don't do middle of the night. I don't do mornings. So I was listening to her and I'm like, oh, great. I'm going to get woken up in the middle of the night. Anyway, so I was kind of banking on it because I didn't really have a solid path. So I went to bed last night and then I woke up at 6:30 this morning and I'm like, it's 6:30. I didn't get woken up. Crap. I don't know what I'm going to do. So anyway, I've got my notes. I'm like, nah, I've got this. It's all going to be fine. I kid you not, 10:04, I was like, okay, now I know what I'm going to talk about. So I texted my friend who's in hospital and I said, 10:04, a bit late. But never mind, we got there in the end. And then Deb spoke, and what you said, Deb, is exactly what I'm going to talk about as well. So again, it was that little nudge, Zane, of like, okay, this is what I need to share about in my story. So I have been really fortunate to grow up in the church. I grew up in the Baptist church where the old ladies' hair matched the colour of their clothes on the day that they came to church. So that was always a highlight as a kid because you're like, oh, I wonder what colour hair Joyce is going to have this week. It's like so exciting. And then getting older, became part of the Pentecostal church through the CRC. We were with the Salvos for a time. But the probably biggest chunk of our life, our married life, was with a group called SALT. We were part of Portside, and then we went out and did a home church. And we all had babies together, and we raised each other's kids, and we just loved people. And that's probably the most impactful time of what we did in our life so far. For someone growing up in the church, we actually stepped away from organised church, and then we had to go, what does it actually look like when you don't have to rock up at 10 o'clock on Sunday, or you don't have to go to music practice or Bible studies or whatever? All of that stripped away, and all you've got left is your actual faith. And that was really, really hard for all of us, because all of us who went out and did that were people who were fortunate to grow up in the church. And then we raised kids who we had to show them what Jesus looked like without the traditional church. And during that time, we were a really close-knit group, and one of our friends got cancer. We all had young kids, and she battled cancer for 7 years, and her kids were 9 and 6 when she passed away. And she was our pastor's wife, and really impactful time. And maybe, looking back, the reason we were all together, bunkering down and looking after each other, was to get through that time. So back during that time, I read this book called Divine Nobodies, and it's by this guy called Jim Palmer. And I reckon I was at Coorong, and I just saw the title, and the title grabbed me, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll read that. And it really, really hit me hard in a good way. Jim Palmer was a pastor of a megachurch in the US. He had everything going for him as what success looked like. Then his marriage broke down and he went bush. He did a bit of a Forrest Gump, really. Jumped in his car and travelled all around America. And as he went, he met all these people that were divine nobodies. And he said he met more people outside of his megachurch that he was so proud of. He met more people and knew Jesus closer when he went to one shop and met the mechanic. And the mechanic was that divine nobody. And didn't preach at him, didn't scare him, but he was just a divine nobody. And he was Jesus to Jim Palmer when Jim Palmer was a broken man. And then he'd go to the next place and meet another person who was that divine nobody. And then Deb was talking today, and I'm like, you know, we're all divine nobodies, all of us. And I don't have a super crazy, inspiring story to tell, but I do know that I'm a divine nobody, and we all are, and we're made that way for a reason. Now, I have a really big justice bent. When I was younger, I used to be the one at all the protest rallies. I'd be at Government House. Lexi went to a few protests when she was a baby. I even took my mum to a protest, I remembered today. Lexi's frowning because that's like, whoa. And I used to work in recruitment years ago, and these people would ring up and be mean. If someone is mean to me or someone I know, so help you, you will get my wrath. And I'm pretty easygoing, but I don't like mean. And I would have been 20, I reckon, and I worked at this recruitment company, and this guy used to keep ringing me, and he was just so rude, and really everyone was scared of this guy. So anyway, he rang and he was rude again, he rang again, and I think I gave him 3 strikes, and I just let him have it with both barrels. And I was this 20-year-old girl, and I'm like, listen, mate, you do not treat people this way. You do not speak to me this way. I will not do what you want, rah, rah, rah. And he was like really taken aback. So anyway, hang up the phone. I was so proud of myself. I'm like, there we go, taught him. And I was talking to a friend of mine who was a police officer later, and I was saying about this guy, and he made me so angry, and he goes, what was his name? So I told him his name. And my friend, who's a copper, just went white. And he's like, was that such and such? I said, yeah, that's the one. He goes, you know, he's like one of the leaders of the Hells Angels. And I was like, I think it was the Hells Angels. I don't remember which one. And I was like, oh. Oh, and he goes, right, from now on you have to keep the door locked when you're at work. You can't work on your own, all this kind of stuff. But you know what? That guy ever since was my best mate. Every time he'd ring up, he'd ask me how my day was. How are you, Kerry? I'm good, thanks, Grant. How are you? So being a divine nobody doesn't mean you just take whatever's given to you. You can still show justice and mercy and humility in the people that you meet with. And then I just thought, in all of that, one of the biggest people that influenced my life is probably my nan, and she was the biggest example of a divine nobody. And I was thinking about growing up that we used to have our Sunday roasts. Did everyone grow up having Sunday roasts? A lot of people did. My nan used to cook these roasts in a fry pan, right? Lexi, just close your ears for child safety. But she had the old 1950s kitchen, and then the table was in the kitchen as well, and then the kids were on the card table, and then the fry pan was right there. And all the kids were on the card table, so it was like you just reached up and touched that hot thing. Easy done. But we'd all cram in here. And then I was thinking back, and I'm like, we had my uncle who was blind, so we had to explain to him where his food was using the clock method, and so your peas are at 2 o'clock and so forth. We had the other Uncle Charlie who was deaf. So then you had to yell at Uncle Charlie. Meanwhile, blind Uncle Vern can't work out why everyone's yelling, but anyway. And we're at the kids at the card table. Then my pop got Alzheimer's, and so he couldn't remember what was going on. So then we've got someone who can't remember, someone's yelling, someone's explaining that your peas are at 2 o'clock, kids are trying to touch the hot fry pan. But I grew up, and I was fortunate to grow up in a space where my nan was a divine nobody. And that was her family, but she did that in the Church of Christ that she was involved in. And her whole life, she was that divine nobody. And so I just want to encourage all of us to keep doing what we're doing. I'm really fortunate that Dave is my divine nobody. We've been married for years, and I'm very thankful for the person he is. And I'm so happy to be able to watch Lexi be a divine nobody at her workplace, and Gabby do that up in the kids, and Ali at her workplace, and Zach, who I now have part ownership with his mum, watching what he does at his workplace and at rugby and here. And divine nobodies is it. Just do a little bit, because that's where people actually see Jesus. They see it out there, not coming in here. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Zane. Thank you both for being bold enough to come up here and share your stories. I know sometimes it's a very daunting task for many people. But as I was listening to you both talk, and I was thinking about one of my favourite books in the Bible, the book of Ruth. And when it's an interesting book, because you come through, as you're reading the Bible, you're reading the Old Testament and the books, and God doing this miraculous work in creation and through a whole nation, and all this kind of stuff, and Judges and what God's doing with powerful kings and all so on and so forth. And you get this one book about one person. And the thing when I studied that book that stuck out to me the most was that God isn't just, sometimes we can think that God is just caught up in all the big things that go on. What happens here in the church and what happens in Australia and around the world. But the book of Ruth illustrates that God cares about individuals. And he wants to walk with you as you walk. Like Zane, lost in life, lost in a river, maybe lost in a national park. God is always there, wanting to guide you, wanting to lead you, wanting to walk with you. So this week I asked, would you guys take some time just to listen to God? Spend some time in his presence and see what he's saying to you. Because the cool thing about it is you do not know what God will do with you in your life if you walk with him, and the ripple effect that it may have. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for Zane and Kerry. We thank you for the gift they are to this church. But we thank you for the work that you have done and the work you are going to do in their lives. And Father, we pray that you will continue to work in their lives and our lives, and continue to make us more and more like you. Father, this week, make your presence known to us in a new and special way. In your name, amen.